I often use the Seinfeld quote, public speaking is people's number one fear and death is number two, which means at a funeral, you'd rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy.
You're listening to a Bio Reset Medical podcast with Dr. Cook. If you have questions or want to talk more about your symptoms and issues, you can always reach us at 650-888-7950.
Welcome to the show today, and I'm delighted to have you here because I have my new friend Dave Aizer, like laser, and he's a media coach, and so he's coaching me, and I've been learning a whole bunch of things from him, and he's going to teach me how to become the Howard Stern of podcasting.
Okay, so, setting the goals low, I see. Okay, good.
Yeah, exactly. So welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm great. It's really fun being here. I love the show. I'm excited to chat with you. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, thanks so much. So, it's been interesting to talk to you about your experiences in media. Tell us a little bit about just what your background is, so people can learn from you.
Sure. Yeah, I fell in love with television broadcasting my junior year of high school when we did the morning announcements one day in journalism class. And I got to be news anchor that day, and they turned on the light and turned on the camera, and I said, "Welcome to the morning announcements," and I was hooked. That was all that it took for me. I went home and I told my parents, I know what I want to do with my life. And I went to college. I studied broadcast journalism. I ended up really fortuitously, I got a job right out of college in Orlando working for ESPN. And then from there, I landed this incredible dream job of hosting a live national game show on Nickelodeon for 5 years, which was so cool. Then I moved to Los Angeles. I worked for American Idol for a little bit. Then I moved to Manhattan. I had a sports comedy web show out of my apartment, and I worked for the Onion News Network. Then I moved back to South Florida where it all started, and I hosted a morning show on the CW for a decade. And now I'm doing some freelance TV hosting, and I'm also coaching you on being the next Howard Stern of podcasts.
That's going to be amazing. Now, what was that? So take me back to that when you were in high school. What was the feeling that you had when the lights came on and you started talking?
I was heavily involved in drama as a kid. I did a lot of plays, a lot of acting. So I always had that bug. I don't know what it was. I just liked to perform. But I had never done anything like this before. This was the early 90s. And, this technology was kind of new. There's people doing televised announcements in school. So I never really had the camera light on my face and the TV camera on and the director pointing at me. And it was mind blowing. And just reading the teleprompter, probably very poorly, but doing that and just coming alive and feeling like I was this news anchor. It was so cool. I loved it. I was hooked. And for me, there was no turning back.
And did you get nervous at all?
Probably. I'm sure I did. I probably was trying to impress a girl or something like noble like that back in the day. I don't remember if I got nervous or not, but I can tell you in college, super nervous. In college as a freshman, I was doing some of the University of Miami newscasts and doing some radio stuff, and I was terrified every day that I was sounding like a buffoon.
Uh-huh. It's interesting since you're gonna teach me how to become the Howard Stern of podcasting, which would make me the king of all podcasting, actually. So we're setting our goals appropriately, but it seems to me that Howard is amazing at not worrying about being a buffoon because he's so driven. Do you think about that or that concept?
I think that, the great ones like Howard have complete ownership of who they are as a creator. Howard is who he is over a lifetime worth of experience. He has struggled, he has failed, he has succeeded, he's failed again. And now he's at the point where he knows. It's funny because if you listen to Howard, he's totally neurotic. He goes to his therapist all the time. He's afraid of everything. But yet he is the man when it comes to interviewing celebrities. He's most comfortable in that, on that set, on that sound stage with the microphone. And I think he just has like total ownership of who he is. And for any great performer, actor, broadcaster, singer, you can have all the insecurities in the world. But when those lights are on you, you just really got to believe in your heart that you rock it. You're worthy. You have ownership of it. I mean, it's like you as a physician, right? You're making life or death decisions for people. You can't vacillate. You just need to totally believe in your decisions. And I think the great ones like Howard, they know what they're doing. They know they're the best at it. And that's how they approach it.
Now, you told me something that just blew my mind yesterday when you told me about imposter syndrome. Because I think so, it's everybody faces it, but tell us what that is.
It's this idea that no matter how credentialed you are, no matter how successful you are, to my last talking point that I was making, whether you are the best at what you do or not, or have more experience than anybody else. And sometimes this idea of, when it's time for you to speak in public, this fear washes over you that maybe you're an imposter. Maybe you aren't worthy of the spotlight. Maybe your message shouldn't be heard by anybody. Why have these people paid money to sit and listen to me? Why did I get this job as a TV host? And I have worked with some of the more successful people in this country, hugely, in any way you want to define it, creatively, economically, status, all of these things, super smart and visionary people. But, when they get on stage, it's like they forget all of this. So what I coach people is, take a few moments before you speak on stage or on your podcast or on TV. If you have to write it down, write it down. If you have to say it out loud, say it out loud. But just kind of read your resume back to yourself. Remind yourself of how great you are and how worthy you are to be telling your story.
Yeah, it's so good. It's so good because you coached me on this yesterday, and then I talked to a couple of rock and roll stars, and then basically imposter syndrome came up, and they were like, they had it too,
right?
And they're on stage singing to 30,000 people, and so I loved that because I profoundly felt that feeling when I was a kid. I remember when I had to give up and give a talk with the 3x5 cards in 5th grade, and I remember standing there and my hands shaking to kind of get through. And I didn't really overcome it until about 2 years ago. I was like giving a lecture and I just started talking. And then I just got up on stage and I had a bunch of slides that I was going to go over. And then I realized for the first time in my life, I was totally comfortable up there. And so then I just spoke for an hour and I just totally winged it.
What do you think it was? What do you think changed?
I got comfortable in my own skin. And then what happened is, like, if I always my whole life, I had been panicked to be in public speaking. And I loved, you got to tell your little story about the Jerry Seinfeld setup. But all my life I had been panicked to be in that public. But yet, if I sat down with you in my office, I could just talk to you and tell you everything. And so then what happened is I feel like I channeled the same feeling that I had being in a clinic one-on-one to being on the stage. And all of a sudden, I just started to speak for a minute, and then I felt it actually organically happen. And I felt like, oh, I'm in clinic now. Mm-hmm. And so then I just started acting like I normally do in clinic. And then people are like, that was by far the best that you've ever done. So it was interesting.
And that's one of the things that you and I were talking about, was that when you become a really good public speaker, all you do is focus on the moment, on the storytelling, just living in that moment. The really good ones, like you're just talking about, are not thinking about, did I prepare enough? What if the crowd doesn't like me? Is my shirt okay? What am I doing with my hands? None of that stuff. You're just telling a story. And the second part of that is the idea that you and I have discussed, is the whole progress, not perfection idea. I think a big moment for people when they go from okay public speakers to really good public speakers, or maybe even great, is when they can when they can get rid of the idea that they are chasing perfection. When you can set foot on that stage or that podcast and you're okay with the fact that you're not going to give a perfect performance. And by the way, who really cares? If you had written down 10 questions to ask me today, okay, and 2 of them you forgot to ask or you ran out of time, you could either beat yourself up about it, or you could celebrate that you asked the 8 other questions and they went over really well, and also simultaneously acknowledge that the only person on planet Earth who knows you didn't ask those questions is you. So the audience doesn't even know you goofed anything up. They have no idea.
Yeah.
So who really cares, you know? And if you didn't ask a question as well as you wanted to, or if you tripped on a word, people listen to it and 3 seconds later they've moved on to the next thing. So once public speakers can let go of everything needs to be perfect and they can just exist, that's when the creativity really starts flowing.
That's kind of what I'm basically coaching people to do in my practice. Like people with anxiety and stress, I'm coaching them. That's why I found my conversation with you yesterday so useful. And even like in the end, when we did a practice interview and then I did amazing, and then I kind of screwed it up at the end. And then I was like, in my mind, I was like, well, I totally screwed that one up. And then you were like, no, you did amazing. Who cares about that little thing? And then I walked away from that with a feeling for the rest of the day that was a little bit like, well, who cares about that little thing? It was very powerful.
Right. Because even the most seasoned professionals goof up. Let me tell you, I have been a TV host for 20 years. I have hosted live TV, tape TV, national TV, local TV, game shows, newscasts, sports. I have made a ton of mistakes on live TV. And in the beginning, you obsess about them, but then you're like, what are you going to do? And, you know, at one point, I just started to embrace them. So if it was a totally harmless throwaway mistake, who cares? I just move on. But if I goofed up on something and I was aware of it, I would own it on camera and make a joke about it, usually self-deprecatingly. Like I said something on a live morning show, totally Freudian slip of the tongue. I said something that came out so dirty and I didn't mean it at all. But, you know, it was live TV and my co-host is cracking up and my cameraman is crying of laughter and I laughed. And then I made a joke like, well, I guess after the show, I'm going straight to HR. And it just turned out to be like such a cool little moment, you know, and like it came from a mistake. So sometimes that stuff, like when you watch a movie and you stick around for the outtakes, sometimes those are the best parts, the most genuinely charming parts. So I think this idea of like, everything must be perfect is boring. That's boring. Just be a performer.
Oh God, that's so good. That's so good. What intimidates you the most now about getting out there? Do you ever get scared? Is there any fear?
I think the only thing now for me is when I put undue importance on a speech, when I do it to myself. In other words, I could go interview anybody and the idea of that is not going to make me nervous. I can go on any television show and the idea of that is not going to make me nervous. But if it's, you know, I can be a perfectionist, which is something that I have been working on in my own life for what feels like 100 years. And I know I keep saying progress, not perfection. I say it all the time, every day. And almost always I acknowledge it and live it and breathe it. But there are times when for me, the stakes are a little higher because I think to myself, oh man, I really want this speech to go well because I want to put this speech on my website and I want to use this speech as my calling card. So when people when they want their own great speech, they're going to see this one. So when I put all of this extraneous stuff on it, then I feel a little anxiety. But, you know, as I said to you yesterday, we spent some time talking about, that is not necessarily a bad thing. You know, this idea of like, don't be nervous, don't be nervous. If your viewers or your listeners are just starting out, they're going to be nervous. You all are going to be nervous when you speak in public. But yeah, that in and of itself is not bad. It's energy. As a performer, you want energy. It's what you can do with it. So even to answer your question, even when I do get a little nervous, I've just done this for so long that I can take it and like lean into it and use it to just project more and have more power and and have a little more presence with that energy. So sometimes it's some of my better performances when I have the anxiety or the nervousness.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. What was your quote? I love that quote that Seinfeld has. I always watch comedians in cars getting coffee now.
Yeah, he's great. Yeah, I was saying that because we were talking about the idea of starting off a speech in a dynamic way, not coming out and saying, "Hi, everybody, my name is Dave Aizer. I'm going to talk to you about effective public speaking. And here's what we're going to do. Take a look at the slide behind me. First, I'm going to welcome you with a story about," how boring is that? So I like to come out and hit people with a quote or a joke or a raise your hand if you love public speaking. Now raise your hand if you hate public speaking, something like that. So I often use the Seinfeld quote, and I put it up on the PowerPoint behind me. And he says that public speaking is people's number one fear and death is number two, which means at a funeral, you'd rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy, which is such a brilliant, he's the best. It's a great quote. And everybody laughs. And it's a good way to start a speech because now everybody's, feeling it, and you got them all on your side and they're engaged with each other.
I saw an episode. I was watching comedians in cars getting coffee, and he was speaking about stand-up, and he said the proof, and it's like a mathematical proof: if A,
like
then
geometry.
B,
Yeah,
and then B, then C. And so then what you do is you start with a bunch of people that are in the funeral, and you do a mathematical proof that proves they would rather be in the casket than given the eulogy, which is basically what you just did. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so then the mathematical proof is just math.
Yeah.
So then therefore that you would rather be dead than talking, which is and it's just such a great setup for wherever you want to go.
Yeah, and he, because I watch Comedian Cars Getting Coffee too, and he often talks about so many things that I teach that he lives and he breathes, because I talk about how important it is to rehearse and to prepare. And this is a guy Jerry Seinfeld, who has performed a million times. He hosted the most successful show ever. He's killed it wherever he's ever gone, and he still gets nervous about material. And he'll still go to some club at 1 o'clock in the morning, and he'll just workshop jokes. And they all do it, right? Like Chris Rock and Chappelle and all these giants, all these titans are still going to the Yuck Yuck store at 1:30 in the morning to do a set, which is awesome. So if you're a public speaker and you're like, you know what, I wrote this speech. Yeah, it sounds good. That'll be funny. Oh, that'll go well. That joke will kill. I'm ready. You're not ready. If Jerry Seinfeld is not ready, you're not ready.
You're not ready.
You're not ready. You got to rehearse on camera. You got to watch it. So he's so committed to being great, which is why he's great.
Who's your favorite episode of that show what comedian did you love that he talked to?
On Comedians in Cars.
Yeah.
One of the ones that I thought was so great, because it was so interesting on multiple levels, was the Eddie Murphy one. Did you see that one?
Yeah, God, I loved that. Loved that one.
Awesome, right? Because at first I'm watching it with my wife, and we're like, neither of them are being really funny right now. Like, this isn't funny in the beginning. And so I'm like, I thought this was supposed to be funny, but it was thoughtful, and it was introspective, and it was about their insecurities and starting out in comedy, because they were on a bill together 30 years ago, starting out, which is incredible to see them on the same night. But then they just, like, I don't know, it was really honest to me about hustling and being turned down for stuff and failing and not getting the laugh. But then then Eddie started doing impersonations and stuff, and it was just terrific.
I loved that one too, because I'm trying to think of when they recorded that, because I saw that, and then it was right around that time My Name is Dolomite came out, and then Eddie did that, triumphant at the end of 2019 final episode of the season of Saturday Night Live. And that was so iconic.
Yeah.
And for me, for that whole second half of the year, it was like a reascendancy of Eddie Murphy. And so then to me, that episode was this sort of like, I got into his head, which was amazing. and then we got to see the trajectory of that played out, especially, and then and then and then it's in retrospect it's even greater because all of a sudden that whole thing doesn't exist anymore because there was like no Saturday Night Live.
Yes, right. So true. And I think there's like a million lessons, because now that we're having this conversation, now I'm really thinking about all of it. I think there's a million lessons to take from it, including when he was on Saturday Night Live, not for his triumphant return, but when he was on the time before, it was like the 30th anniversary special or whatever it was, and he came out and kind of bombed, and it didn't go well. To me, that's also a great lesson learned, because I said this to you, performing is always about your audience. It always has to be. And if you are in a lousy mood, or if you don't want to be there, or if you have an agenda, you cannot, as a performer, be selfish. I don't care if you're me or if you're Eddie Murphy. You can't do it, because it's not, you need to think of performance from the audience's perspective I think, for all the time, has to be about your audience. And it's like those things, you love music, I love music. And I love Bon Jovi, like my favorite band ever.
Really?
My favorite. Oh, my favorite band ever. But how many times has he sung Living on a Prayer? 700,000 times. He may or may not even like that. He might hate that song. But every time he sings it, doesn't matter if his voice hurts, if he's angry at Richie Sambora, whatever. I've seen him live probably 35 times. And every time he kills it. He goes for it. Even if he can't hit the notes he used to hit, so what? He tries. And so I think, jumping back a little to Eddie Murphy, that one time on SNL it didn't go well. Like, he just wasn't in the spirit of it. He wasn't in the mood to be there, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So another lesson, a valuable lesson for performers is, if you're having a bad day, nobody cares. Suck it up for 5 minutes and kill for the audience. And then you could be miserable in your trailer or your car or wherever you go afterwards.
Wow, that's interesting. So cool. It kind of reminds me of it. Thinking about John Bon Jovi. Like, yeah. I heard, because Kenny Rogers passed away, and I heard Kenny Rogers talking, and he said, I felt like I couldn't be Johnny Cash and Willie Nelson. Like, I couldn't be who they were, so I had to be somebody else. And, I've always felt this way about John Bon Jovi, that like he created something out of thin air. He created like almost like a genre, of pop rock. And I loved that genre because he was huge. If you think about we're quite similar ages, MTV.
Yeah.
Remember when MTV came out? And
of course.
God.
Yeah, Headbangers Ball, big show, right? And then he did that incredible, talking about taking a risk. It's really what's interesting to me as we're having this conversation is every story we're talking about, I keep thinking of ways to spin that towards teaching points. Him and Richie came out in, what was the show? It was like an MTV Awards show, and they did an acoustic set. They did Living on a Prayer and Wanted Dead or Alive acoustic, which led to the whole acoustic, all of my MTV's acoustic stuff. And he just did this he did this incredible performance of Wanted Dead or Alive that was so great, but probably risky in that it's not really an acoustic song. I mean, obviously part of it is, but he just didn't really strip down, and it led to the advent of this franchise, this MTV acoustic franchise. So he was a pioneer in many ways, and not just because he had big frosted hair in the 80s.
That's amazing. I last night I had like the most magical, sort of wonderful evening, and it's interesting because somebody said something to me about MTV Unplugged.
That's what it was. I forgot the name. Unplugged.
MTV Unplugged, yeah. And so then last night, beginning to end, I listened to the Bob Dylan Unplugged because I just said, "Hey, let's go back in time," and he does. He does one of his great sort of epic songs called Desolation Row, which kind of harkens to many of the themes going on probably politically, back then, but as true now as they ever were. Mm-hmm. And I was sitting there right here at this table listening to the richness of the sound that they did on MTV Unplugged. And I remember being so wildly transfixed to that, because being a kid from Montana, I had never heard anything like that. I was like, you got to be kidding me. This is the greatest thing going in the world,
Fantastic, revolutionary, ahead of their time. So interesting on so many levels. Interesting from a television production standpoint, interesting from a performance standpoint, because I think, and tell me what you think, I think the performers loved doing it, right? Mm-hmm. Like it was a really cool thing for them. So it was a home run for everybody. The MTV made a killing off of it. People like me and you growing up loved it. And I think for the performers, which you and I were talking about, how to make your guests feel special, I think it made them feel special. You had the biggest names in rock music doing these like stripped down acoustic sets. Incredible.
You know what? It's interesting because I interviewed Martin and Naomi yesterday, and they're kind of rock and rollers and rock and roll and country, but they're used to singing to 30,000 people, and it's a crazy moment right now because their industry literally just evaporated.
Sure.
And so they're gonna. I'm so excited about this because they're gonna get in an RV and drive around the country and sing and play music, and they're going to stop here for a week and play music for me. But we got to bring back MTV Unplugged. Yeah. We got to do it. We got to do it right here, and we got to bring it back because we got to get these musicians, because they need to get their songs out there.
Yeah, a lot of these musicians are doing these like YouTube videos and from their living rooms and stuff. So I've been watching a few of them. I was watching Rob Thomas the other day. I think he's so talented. And yeah, it's like this cool, it's a different look, it's a look into their homes, and Rob Thomas is like playing this huge piano in his living room. It's wild. You're like peeling back the curtain a little bit, seeing these people at home. I think it's terrific. I love watching these things. I watched One Republic. It was funny. It was Ryan Tedder, and then it was, I guess, like his bass guitar player and his lead guitar player. And they were all in his house, but they were all social distancing from each other in the same room, and he had his camera pretty wide angle so you could see everybody. So you're like three musicians from a band in the same room, 6 feet apart from each other. It's neat. It's creative people doing really creative stuff.
Interesting. Yeah. I think what we have to do is I'm looking forward for that social distancing to be cut in half.
3 feet.
And then what's going to happen is going to be like 2 feet. Because what's going to happen is some people ask me, well, when's the social distancing going to end? And it was going to be a social thing. Like, just like the band knows that they have to be spread out in the room right now.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so then all of a sudden it's like, we're going to, now everybody take one step closer to each other.
And every time you take a step, they take your temperature. Make sure no one has a fever. Yeah, they just keep doing it every step. All right, let's wrap this up. But dude, I was like, that turned into, we were just doing a whole, I wish we were recording on that. I mean, I guess we are.
We are recording. I'm going to put this up.
Oh, you are?
Oh, why not? Come on.
Oh, that's fine with me. That's fine with me. But I'm sorry that I screwed up the ending then for you. Can you edit it at all? You want to edit that part out?
So guess what? You didn't screw anything up. You were perfect.
Well, but this part where I said, let's stop. I mean, you don't.
No, I know, but this is what I'm saying. You were perfect.
Right. Thank you. But just for the sake of the show, if you could just not use that part, be going.
Because otherwise the show is going to be terrible because of that.
No, but now we're still talking about this on camera. But I acknowledge your point. But I'm glad that you're going to do it, because it's funny. This whole time I'm thinking like, this is actually amazing. It's too bad that we didn't treat this as a thing. But yeah, good for you for being smart enough to actually think forward that you're going to use it.
Yeah,
My pleasure. Go for it. Yeah.
And then I'm going to have you back, and then we're going to figure out how to reach out to John Bon Jovi.
Dude, so I'll tell you a quick story. It sticks with me to this day. I don't get starstruck. I have interviewed, people up here. I was maybe 30 years old, living in Manhattan, working for Nickelodeon in the same building as TRL, the 1515 building on Broadway, Viacom building. So Bon Jovi was on TRL that day, and I somehow did not even know. I had no idea. So I'm down on the first floor lobby in the snack shack, the concession area, getting a power bar or some nonsense, minding my own business. And John Bon Jovi just walks in and is standing this far away from me. And I was like, mind blown. And as I'm realizing this in real time, he asked the lady behind the counter if she has cigarettes. And she said no. And I'm going, Dave, say hi to him. Say hi to him. No, that's lame. Say something more clever. Say, come up with a song lyric. Say, you give cigarettes a bad name. No, that's stupid. Don't say that. Say, cigarettes on a prayer. No, that's stupid. And then while I'm doing all of this, she says no, and he says, okay, thanks, and he leaves. And I never got to say hi to him. And it has like eaten at me since that day. So that's my John Bon Jovi story.
So then this is what you're teaching me, is to kind of to reach out and do that. You know what I mean? I had a similar experience. I grew up in Western Montana. And so I grew up listening to country and folk, but I loved the Grateful Dead more than like life itself. They were just like so large to me. And Jerry Garcia had done all of these collaborations with a guy named David Bromberg, who's like the greatest mandolin player in the world. And so I'm standing in the Seattle airport, and I'm just kind of standing there, and I have this T-shirt that's like has a Chinese character that's going across. It's like very artistic. And I'm just kind of standing there. And then I look over, and David Bromberg is literally standing, David Grisman is standing right next to me. And so I look over, and he goes, I think that's my shirt. Did you steal that? And I go, no, my cousin gave that to me. He goes, I have the exact same shirt, and you took that shirt. And so he's kind of like just toying with me and joking.
Right.
And so then we start to have this amazing conversation. We're kind of joking around, and I'm kind of talking, and I was super comfortable. And then I looked at him, and I go, and I saw like a bunch of guys with like guitars and banjos and stuff like that standing around. And so I go, you're David Grisman, right? And then he goes, yeah. And then he realized I knew who he was. And so then he walked away. And so for years I was like, suck, I screwed that up.
Wait, so he didn't want to be a celebrity. He just wanted to be like a regular dude talking? He just
wanted to be a regular dude talking. And I had like worshipped the music that he had created with Grisman or with Garcia. So it's kind of, but I think it goes to being like this version of yourself and letting it all hang out a little bit, and then just being okay with it, you know.
Totally. Just being okay with it. That's the key. Like I always say, Ellen to me is one of the best hosts on TV. I haven't watched her recently, so maybe she's changed. I don't know. But when Ellen was so successful in her first years as a host, one of the reasons why is because she wasn't a host, right? She wasn't like classically trained. She was an actress and a comedian, but she was it seemed like so comfortable in her own skin that she would wear sweatpants and dance like a goofy person, and people would just like eat it up, you know? And she seemed genuinely interested in what her guests were saying. She interviewed celebrities better than hosts who'd been on TV for 20 years, Dave, you know, because these hosts come on and they have their agenda and they ask these questions and they don't listen. And Ellen was just like, tell me about this. That's so great. No way. Tell me more. But it worked, you know, and to your point, she was herself and she was not classically trained, but who cares? And I haven't watched her lately, but I thought she was great.
I love Ellen. And I love her comedy. Like did you watch her recent comedy special?
No. Mm-mm.
She has a comedy special on Netflix, and she does a little bit, but it's like a slightly different version of like the comic proof. Okay. You know, and she did a little bit of that, and then her comedians in cars getting coffee was totally sublime.
Yeah. All right. I'll check it out. There's so many good ones. The Alec Baldwin one was great too. Did you see that one?
Yes. And you know, it's interesting to me because he has the potential to be a little bit of like a controversial character.
Yeah.
Like I could definitely say that right to his face, and he would be like, "I know,"
Right.
But yet when you listen to him, I think that he has a more academic, intellectual, and super serious, hardworking, dramatic actors take on both on comedy, kind of like what you're saying. It's like, if I would like to have a holodeck experience where I could just go in and then talk to him about media for about 100 hours.
Yeah.
And just, you know what I mean? It's because it was listening to him. I sat there and I realized, oh, he understands all of the mechanics of what's going on.
I think he takes his craft very seriously.
Super seriously.
Yeah. I really do. Because how many great actors, how many actors can be great at comedy and be great at drama? He's so versatile in his roles. He's hilariously funny. 30 Rock, he's just incredible. I mean, his Trump stuff I think is really good too. But then you look at the pantheon of dramatic films he's done, and then he's done action films. Remember when he was like the action star back in the day? He was Jack Ryan. Guy's done everything. So talented.
But in that story, you know, in the Comedians in Cars episode, it's a great example because he talked about being like in high school and getting up and going and working all day.
Right.
And I think that work, you never met anybody that likes to work hard like me. Like, I love hard work more than anybody I've basically ever met. And so then when I see guys like that, and it's even like it's a comedy thing, and then I see, like when the Baldwin one, I sat there and I was like, oh, he's from my tribe. He's from like let's just go work harder than everybody else. And then I realized, oh, I love you. You know, and so then it's interesting then to sort of take in media now in these times, because it's kind of like, oh, okay, well, maybe the Eddie Murphy thing wasn't super funny, but it doesn't matter because you get this window into people's lives and what they're about. And it's like, to me, the exciting thing is that then you begin to create something that has an artistic arc, just like a band does. You know what I mean? Like the Stones you can have periods, but you're designing and creating kind of an artistic take on what we're receiving, you know, in the universe and in the world. So it's kind of, to me, it fills me with a sense of, it fills me with the same feeling I think that you got when the lights came on when you were in high school. And it fills me with this feeling of like, oh, I can do this. Like I can, and in my small corner of the world.
Let me tell you, you can do this because you just interviewed me for like 45 minutes for what I thought was going to be a 5-minute exercise. I thought this was going to be like, yeah, ask me a few questions. I'll press stop. We'll go over it. But I forgot that I was coaching you, and it just became this like hosted conversation. And by the way, it became a conversation, not an interview, which is always the goal. Always the goal. I have to go. I'm taking my wife out for a Mother's Day walk. But let's, whatever you want to do next, let's keep doing stuff together.
Awesome. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
You can find this Bio Reset podcast and others on iTunes, Spotify, and all other top podcast directories, as well as on bioresetpodcast.com. Make sure to subscribe, and thanks for listening.